Thank you, Hans. Thank you to the DSM University. Good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you are located. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. My assignment is to talk to you about our ACEEE National Conference on Energy Efficiency as a resource, and in the process provide a little history about utility energy efficiency policy in the U.S. This first slide is just to provide some background information on our organization and myself. The American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, or ACEEE, is a nonprofit organization founded in 1980 and dedicated to conducting research and policy development in the field of energy efficiency in industry, buildings, utilities, and transportation. We also work on state and national policy relating to energy efficiency. We have about 50 staff in total, with about 40 located in our central office in Washington, D.C., and the rest located in a few states around the nation. I personally live and work from the state of Michigan. Our organization focuses on energy efficiency in all areas. As for myself, there's really only one element I wanted to point to in this background slide, and that is that I did work for 10 years as supervisor of evaluation at the State Utility Regulatory Commission in the state of Michigan. So I do have good background in electricity regulation in the U.S. With that, we can get started. This is just a quick outline of the topics I'll be covering today. First, some background. I'll give a brief history of utility energy efficiency policies in the U.S. and then show how our ACEEE Energy Efficiency as a Resource Conference, we call it the EER Conference, fits into that history. I'll give a chronology of the past EER conferences. Then I'll focus on the 2015 EER Conference, including a brief description of the conference content, attendees. I'll provide the links to obtain specific information about the conference content, as well as a couple of other ACEEE sources of information about utility energy efficiency programs in the U.S. And finally, I'll mention the plans for the 2017 EER conference. Now, to begin, and particularly for the benefit of international participants today who may not be as familiar with the U.S. situation, I wanted to briefly note the structure of the U.S. utility industry and how that affects what we see in terms of energy efficiency policies and programs. In the U.S., electric and gas utilities are all regulated at the state level. The federal government has historically not placed energy efficiency requirements on utilities. There was one exception in the late 1970s under Jimmy Carter during the energy crisis, when utilities were required to provide energy audits for their customers. But that was repealed when Ronald Reagan became president in 1981, and there's been no federal requirement since then. Very recently, President Obama's Clean Power Plan proposal provides indirect leverage to pursue energy efficiency, but still no direct mandate. This state regulation of utilities has both pros and cons. On the positive side, this provides 50 different laboratories where policies can be tested, but it also results in a very large discrepancy in the level of effort that we see across states. For example, the top 10 states account for about 80% of utility energy efficiency spending in the U.S., and utilities in some states do very little. There are a number of commonalities and trends across states, but technically each state is its own little kingdom when it comes to regulation of retail utilities. The bottom line is that we need to individually influence 50 different state policies, and that can be quite a challenge. So one of the advantages of old age is that when I talk about history of energy efficiency, it's pretty much all years that I lived through as a participant, so I can give a first-hand account. to the extent that my memory holds up. But what I would like to do is provide some brief history of the evolution of utility energy efficiency policies and programs in the U.S. and how our ACEEE Energy Efficiency as a Resource Conference fits into that context. To do this, I categorize 5 major phases of utility sector energy efficiency in the U.S. The first phase I call the 1970s energy crisis era, circa 1975 to 83. And this is really where the whole concept of energy efficiency, or energy conservation as it was called back then, was born in response to the OPEC oil embargo. Before that, energy was really too cheap to worry about conserving. The primary purpose of these first programs was to help customers cope with soaring utility bills driven by those high fossil fuel prices. The early programs were heavily residential in focus, and they were focused more on natural gas than electricity. The second phase I call the Integrated Resource Planning, or IRP era, circa 1984 to 1995. And here the primary purpose was to reduce runaway utility system costs, which were heavily driven by expensive generation, especially nuclear. A key objective was to integrate energy efficiency as a utility system resource because it was much cheaper to save energy than to produce it. Here the energy efficiency programs focused on all customer sectors. It was primarily directed towards the electricity industry, and the IRP efforts also tended to be individually utility-based rather than statewide. The third phase I refer to as the Restructuring and Public Benefits era, circa 1995 to 2001. In 1994, California launched an effort to deregulate or restructure their utility industry and rely on the market rather than regulation to assure electricity supply. Among other things, this movement basically rejected the notion of integrated resource planning and the notion of energy efficiency as a utility resource. It was much more driven by a focus on markets. In response, a number of states tried to at least save some energy efficiency programs by creating what were called public benefits programs. These policies commonly featured a statewide approach and often a non-bypassable public benefits charge. Many different administrative approaches were tried. Utilities, state agencies, independent nonprofit organizations. There was a heavy emphasis on market transformation as opposed to resource acquisition. And energy efficiency was regarded as essentially a public good rather than a utility system resource. The fourth phase I refer to as the resource procurement era, circa 2001 to the present. And this phase grew largely as a result of the failure of the deregulation restructuring model to adequately achieve energy efficiency objectives. The primary purpose of this fourth era was to bring energy efficiency back as a resource in response to growing utility system cost and reliability concerns. Although there were other corollary objectives also emerging, environmental and economic development goals and so forth, the primary purpose was energy efficiency as a resource. This era was first targeted at electricity. Then natural gas emerged a mid-decade when natural gas prices soared around 2005, 2006. This era emphasizes outcomes rather than process, in contrast to the earlier eras. There was a trend toward utility administration because efficiency is a utility resource, but not exclusively. There are a few states that do have independent administrators for these programs. The focus really is on energy efficiency on a power plant scale, energy efficiency as a utility system resource. The fifth phase is starting to emerge now, which I call the carbon reduction era. A new objective is to reduce carbon emissions. In this situation, baseload savings tend to be more important than peak savings in terms of carbon reduction. Energy efficiency is still a resource. It's still largely done within the context of achieving lower overall system costs. It's just that carbon costs and goals are incorporated as well. It's more likely to utilize an EERS or energy efficiency resource standard type of approach in terms of assuring the acquisition of energy efficiency targets. But there are other objectives intersecting as well, such as the incorporation of distributed resources like solar PVs, enhancements to the local grid, and so forth. And utility efficiency programs will likely coordinate with other policies, building codes, equipment standards, renewable energy, and so forth. So now that I've walked through that history, it will be easier to put the origin of the ACEEE National Conference on Energy Efficiency as a resource in context. As I mentioned, the IRP era, late 1980s, early 1990s, saw significant growth in utility energy efficiency programs. But then in 1994, California launched utility deregulation, or restructuring, which quickly swept across the country. Here, the whole concept of resource planning and utility resource acquisition fell out of favor, and the market was going to provide. Not surprisingly, national utility spending on energy efficiency dropped by 50% from 1993 to 1998. And this is just a graph to illustrate that 50% drop in efficiency spending during that time period. Then these are the specific events that led to the origin of the ACEEE EER conference. The California electricity crisis hit in 2000. You may have heard of that. There was manipulation of the generation market. There were huge electricity price spikes. There were even rolling blackouts. It became quite evident that the magic of the market was not so great after all. The market wasn't producing low-cost electricity, wasn't producing a reliable electric system, and wasn't capturing the energy efficiency benefits that we knew were available. So ACEEE felt it was time to revitalize the concept of energy efficiency as a utility system resource. And therefore, the ACEEE EER conference is exclusively devoted to that topic, energy efficiency as a utility system resource. We decided to go right to the belly of the beast, the state of California, where utility deregulation movement was born and where the system had melted down. So our first EER conference in California in 2001 and the next three as well were all located in California to make sure they really got the message. Then we decided to move the conference around the nation to areas where exciting energy efficiency developments were occurring. In 2009, it was Chicago, where several Midwest states were enacting strong energy efficiency policies in 2008, 2009. In 2011, it was Denver, when the Southwest states were making some great advances on efficiency. Then the last two were in the South, where energy efficiency was finally starting to grow, and we wanted to recognize and support that development. So what has happened regarding energy efficiency as a resource? This graph shows utility energy efficiency spending by year from 1993 to 2013. You can see the plunge in energy efficiency spending during the restructuring era that I described. Then the huge rise in energy efficiency spending since our first energy efficiency as a resource conference in 2001. The green arrow roughly indicates the first EER conference. Total utility efficiency spending has risen to over $7 billion in recent years. We jokingly refer to this great increase in efficiency as the EER conference effect. But seriously, we do like to feel that our EER conferences have helped contribute to the robust revival of energy efficiency as a resource in the U.S. So with that history, this brings me to the 2015 ACEEE EER conference. It was held in September in Little Rock, Arkansas. We had presentations by over 90 professionals in the utility efficiency field. 25 different breakout sessions on topics including exemplary energy efficiency programs, energy efficiency potential studies, state policies to encourage or require utilities to provide energy efficiency services, and energy efficiency research and evaluation methodologies and results. We also had keynote presentations by Janet McCabe, a top official at the U.S. EPA, on the Clean Power Plan. As you can imagine, there was a great deal of interest in that. Another keynote by Tom Ekman, Director of Power Planning at the Pacific Northwest. The Pacific Northwest has consistently had the best integrated resource planning process in the nation, and Tom gave us the highlights of their latest results. So this is just a slide of the first morning of the conference. We always have welcome remarks by some local dignitaries. So in this case, we had the mayor of Little Rock and one of the commissioners from the Arkansas Public Service Commission. Then we had the keynote address by Janet McCabe. Then we usually have a regional roundup session to present the latest highlights from around the nation. So the regional energy efficiency organizations, I think there are about 7 of them now in the U.S., come in and present highlights of what's going on in their region. And this, most of the rest of the conference is composed of breakout sessions organized around particular topic areas. So this just shows the first afternoon of the conference where we had 5 topic tracks with 3 or 4 presentations per session. The 5 tracks were energy efficiency programs, to hear about specific programs in each of the sectors. Energy efficiency benefits, which does things like look at the benefit cost results and describe some of the benefits of these programs, quantify those. A track on regulatory issues, a track on evaluation and use of data, and then kind of a miscellaneous other key topics track. In a minute, I'll show you how you can access all of the individual presentations from the conference. This is just a profile of attendees at the 2015 EER conference. We had over 370 attendees. There were 3 main categories with roughly a quarter of attendees each: utilities, non-governmental organizations, and consulting firms. And then the rest were from government or a miscellaneous other categories, some private companies and so forth. We consistently receive very high positive ratings in the conference. In this case, it was 4.5 on a 5-point scale. We always do a post-conference evaluation. And we were very pleased to have over 30 businesses, government, and NGO sponsors. This slide just shows the logos of our sponsors, really a great mix of prominent utilities, government organizations, and NGOs. I'll pause for a moment and let you scan the names and logos. We are naturally very grateful to our sponsors to enable us to be able to put these conferences on. I, of course, don't have time to present the content of what was presented at the conference, but here are some key topic areas from our 2015 conference. Successful energy efficiency program examples. We always have at least one session on each sector of the market. There's always great interest in hearing about recent successful programs. We also cover EM&V methodologies and results. It's not a technical evaluation conference, but we do like to present recent developments and the results from folks that do some national assessments of efficiency and so forth, so we always have a track on that. New trends and innovative programs and measures. These days, a very hot topic is where do we go beyond CFLs, so there's a lot of interest in new measures and new program techniques. We had good coverage at this conference of energy efficiency and the Clean Power Plan. As you can imagine, there was a great interest in that, and we hope that continues in spite of the temporary stay that we're seeing right now. And then finally, always a good emphasis on regulatory policies to encourage or require utility energy efficiency programs, things like decoupling, shareholder incentives, EERS standards, and so forth. If you recall our 50-state kingdom situation in the U.S., it's very important to get information out about what various states are doing in this area. So here are two key sources for more information about the conference. My understanding is these slides will be posted by DSM University so people can get access to the links. We don't publish formal papers from this conference, but we do post the actual PowerPoint presentations, and those are available on the ACEEE website. Also, ACEEE prepared a summary report on the conference for the U.S. Department of Energy. That also is available for free download from our website. And for those who may be interested, some additional ACEEE information on state energy efficiency policies and programs. This slide shows a couple of other reports. First, our 2015 State Energy Efficiency Scorecard. ACEEE scores all 50 states on various energy efficiency policies and accomplishments every year, and that was our most recent scorecard. And secondly, we provide a regularly updated summary of state energy efficiency resource standards, which this is the policy which has been the primary driver behind utility energy efficiency programs in the U.S. So we do like to keep people informed about all the states that have those types of policies. And again, all this information is available for free electronic download from our website, ACEEE.org. And finally, just a brief note about our 2017 EER conference. We're still in the planning stages, but it will be held in Arizona, likely in November 2017. A call for proposals to make presentations will come out in February 2017. Information will be sent via email to everyone who's on ACEEE distribution list early in that year. And information will be posted on the ACEEE website under conferences. So you can keep an eye out on our website there for early next year. So that concludes my presentation materials. I'd be happy to answer any questions.